They said he was just another black man who needed to be put in his place. They were wrong. What happened inside Courtroom 14 of the Jefferson County Courthouse on a sweltering Tuesday morning in August would be talked about for years. It would be shared millions of times online. It would cost one man his badge, his pension, and every ounce of pride he thought he had. And it would remind an entire nation that respect, real respect, cannot be taken from a man who has already stared death in the face and laughed. But before we get to the courtroom, before we get to the moment that changed everything, you need to understand who Marcus Cole was. Because the cop in that courtroom, he saw a tall black man in a suit. He saw someone he thought he could push around, someone he thought wouldn't push back. He didn't see the 11 years of special operations service. He didn't see the 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan. He didn't see the classified missions in Syria and Somalia that Marcus Cole would never be fully allowed to talk about. He didn't see the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration in the United States, that Marcus had earned by running toward an ambush that had pinned down his entire platoon. He didn't see any of that. All Officer Derek Hamlin saw was a man he wanted to remind of his place. And that was the last mistake Derek Hamlin ever made in uniform. Marcus Cole was 34 years old when he walked into that courthouse. 6 feet 2 inches of quiet, contained power. The kind of man who moves slowly not because he's lazy, but because he's already calculated every possible exit in the room before he sat down. SEAL training does that to you. 11 years of it hardens something inside a man, not into callousness, but into clarity. Marcus didn't waste energy. Not his breath, not his footsteps, and certainly not his emotions. He was there that morning for something that should have been routine. A property dispute. His late mother's house, the house she had scrimped and saved for over 40 years, the house in the Eastview neighborhood where Marcus had grown up, where he'd learned to ride a bike on the cracked sidewalk out front, where his mother had pressed his dress blues the day he shipped out for BUD/S training, was being contested by a predatory real estate company called Greystone Capital, who claimed there was a paperwork error in the deed transfer. Marcus knew it was nonsense. His attorney, a sharp woman named Diana Reyes, knew it was nonsense. The paperwork was clean. The title was clear. But Greystone had money, and money has a way of making nonsense seem complicated. So Marcus put on his best suit, a charcoal gray 2-piece that his mother had picked out herself at a department store 3 years before she passed, and he walked into that courthouse ready to fight. Legally, quietly, the right way. He had no idea that the fight waiting for him wasn't going to be inside the courtroom. It was going to be in the hallway just outside it. Officer Derek Hamlin was 19 years on the force and proud of every single one of them. Courthouse security detail wasn't glamorous work. He'd be the first to tell you that. But it was steady, and it gave him something he craved more than a paycheck. Authority. Derek was the kind of man who had grown up being told he was special without ever being asked to prove it. High school football star in a small town that loved him for it. Married young, had 2 kids, joined the force at 22 because his uncle was a sergeant and put in a word. He'd never left Jefferson County. Never really wanted to. The world outside made him nervous in ways he didn't like to examine too closely, so he didn't examine them at all. What Derek did instead was control the things he could control. And for 19 years, the things he could control were mostly people who came through metal detectors and sat in hallways waiting for their cases to be called. He liked that. He liked the look people got when they saw the badge. That brief flash of anxiety, even from people who had done nothing wrong, that said, I need to make sure he's okay with me. Derek fed on that look. It made him feel large in a way that nothing else in his life quite managed. But there were certain people who didn't give him that look. And those people made Derek Hamlin feel something he would never in a million years admit was fear. Marcus arrived at the courthouse at 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before his 9 a.m. hearing. He went through security without incident, emptied his pockets, removed his belt, nodded politely to the officer at the scanner. He collected his things on the other side, checked his phone for a message from Diana, and made his way toward the second floor where Courtroom 14 was located. He found a bench in the hallway outside the courtroom and sat down, clasped his hands, breathed slowly. He was thinking about his mother, about how she'd lived in that house for 4 decades and how no corporation with a slick logo was going to take it from her memory. He was thinking about what she always used to say to him before anything important. Baby, you just walk in there like you already own the room. Because you do. He smiled at that, closed his eyes for just a moment. That's when he heard the footsteps stop in front of him. He opened his eyes. Derek Hamlin was standing there, thumbs hooked in his belt, looking down at Marcus with an expression that Marcus had seen before. He'd seen it in bars. He'd seen it in parking lots. He'd seen it in the faces of certain officers at certain checkpoints in certain parts of the country where a black man in a nice car was apparently a suspicious thing. He knew that look. You in the right place? Derek said. Marcus looked up at him calmly. Courtroom 14. Yes. Case number. Marcus paused. I'm sorry. Your case number, Derek said, louder this time, as if Marcus had a hearing problem. What's your case number? Marcus glanced around the hallway. There were other people sitting on benches, white men, white women, one elderly Asian couple, and not one of them had been asked for a case number. He looked back at Derek. I don't believe that's a requirement to sit in a public hallway, Marcus said evenly. Derek's jaw tightened, and that's when he made his first mistake. Derek Hamlin took one slow step forward. It was the kind of step that was designed to make a message, a physical, spatial message that said, I am bigger than you, and I am in charge here. It was a move Derek had used hundreds of times over 19 years. Get close. Fill the space. Make the person shrink. Marcus Cole did not shrink. He sat exactly where he was, spine straight, hands clasped loosely in his lap, and looked up at Derek with the kind of calm that only comes from having been genuinely, seriously afraid before, and having survived it. When you've been pinned down in a mountain pass in Kunar province with 2 teammates wounded and an insurgent force 3 times your size closing in from both sides, a heavy-set courthouse cop taking a step toward you does not register as a threat. It registers as noise. I'm going to need you to stand up, Derek said. Why? Marcus asked. The word was simple, polite, and absolutely without apology. Derek blinked. People didn't usually ask why. They just stood up. Because I'm asking you to. You're asking me to stand up from a public bench in a public hallway, Marcus said. I'd like to know the reason. The hallway had gotten quieter. The elderly Asian couple had stopped their murmured conversation. A young woman with a manila folder on her lap had looked up from her phone. Derek could feel the attention on him, and it did something bad to his blood pressure. I can have you removed from the building, Derek said. On what grounds? Marcus asked. Obstruction. Of what? Marcus tilted his head just slightly. You haven't asked me to do anything lawful that I've refused to do. I came through your security checkpoint without incident. I am sitting quietly in a public hallway before a scheduled court appearance. I haven't raised my voice, made any threatening gestures, or disturbed anyone. He paused. So I'll ask again, on what grounds? Derek had gone red in the face. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. The suit, the calm voice, the complete refusal to be rattled. It was doing something to him that he didn't have a name for. He took another step forward. And then, whether it was frustration or habit or something uglier buried deep in the basement of who Derek Hamlin was, he did something that would end his career. He kicked the sole of Marcus's shoe. Not hard enough to call it an assault, just hard enough to make the point. The same thing you might do to a dog that's lying in your way. It was dismissive. It was contemptuous. It was the physical expression of everything he hadn't been able to say with words. You are beneath me. Move. The hallway went absolutely silent. The young woman with the manila folder stared. The elderly Asian couple stared. 2 attorneys who had just come out of a nearby office door stopped walking and stared. Marcus Cole looked down at his shoe. Then he looked up at Derek Hamlin. And he smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that a man allows himself when he suddenly realizes that the universe has just handed him exactly what he needs. He stood up. At his full 6'2", Marcus was 3 inches taller than Derek, and where Derek's bulk was soft, the kind that comes from years of desk work and drive-thrus, Marcus's was structured and deliberate. He stood the way men stand when they've had to hold a position under fire. Rooted, unhurried, completely present. Derek took an involuntary half-step back. He would hate himself for that later. But he couldn't help it. I want your badge number, Marcus said quietly. And your name. You don't get to demand. Badge number, Marcus repeated. And your name. Officer Hamlin. And you don't. Thank you, Officer Hamlin. Marcus reached into the breast pocket of his charcoal suit and produced his phone. He turned it so Derek could see the screen, a voice memo app, already recording. I've been recording since you first approached me. I want you to know that. Derek stared at the phone. I'm also going to need to know the name of your supervisor, Marcus continued. and I'm going to need the contact information for the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office Internal Affairs Division. If you could direct me to. Now listen here. Derek stepped forward again, reaching for Marcus's arm. Marcus moved. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't violent. To anyone watching, it looked almost gentle, a subtle pivot, a slight redirect, and suddenly Derek's reaching hand was in a position it hadn't intended to be in, and Derek himself was slightly off balance, blinking, unsure exactly how he'd ended up a foot to his left. Marcus had simply moved out of reach in a way that neutralized the grab without escalating it. The kind of thing you learn when you spend years training to control a situation with the minimum possible force. "Please don't touch me," Marcus said, still quiet, still even. "I haven't done anything to justify physical contact, and I would strongly encourage you not to make this worse than it already is." Derek was breathing hard now. Across the hallway, the young woman had her own phone out. She was recording too, and from the far end of the corridor, another figure was walking quickly toward them. Diana Reyes, Marcus's attorney, a compact woman in her early 40s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the expression of someone who has just spotted a legal gift falling from the sky. "Marcus," she called as she approached. "What's going on?" "Officer Hamlin was just about to provide me with his supervisor's contact information," Marcus said. Diana looked at Derek. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the phone in Marcus's hand and the phone in the hand of the young woman across the hall. Her eyes went to Derek's face, which was the approximate color of a fire hydrant. 23 years as a civil rights attorney had given Diana Reyes an almost supernatural ability to read a room. And what she read in this hallway, in about 4 seconds, made her reach into her own bag for her legal pad. "Officer," she said pleasantly, uncapping her pen, "could you spell your last name for me, please?" Derek Hamlin did the only thing he could think to do. He walked away. He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked back toward the security checkpoint at the end of the hall, and he stood there with his back very straight and his eyes fixed on the middle distance, and he tried to remember how to breathe normally. Marcus watched him go. Then he sat back down on the bench, straightened his jacket, and looked at Diana. "You got here just in time," he said. "What happened?" Marcus told her. All of it. The demand for a case number. The escalation. And then he got to the part about the kick, and Diana Reyes stopped writing and looked at him over her reading glasses. "He kicked you," she said. "The sole of my shoe. Not hard. Enough." Diana looked down the hallway toward Derek, who was now pretending to examine the security monitor with great interest. "And you have it recorded?" "From just before he asked me to stand up." Diana put the cap back on her pen. She looked at the young woman across the hall, who was still watching. "Ma'am, did you see what happened?" The young woman nodded. "All of it. I got it on video." Diana Reyes allowed herself a small smile. She turned back to Marcus. "We still have a property case to win this morning," she said. "But after that," she picked up her briefcase. "Officer Hamlin is going to have a very bad rest of the year." Marcus nodded. He thought about his mother's house, about the cracked sidewalk and the bicycle and the dress blues. "Walking like you already own the room. Let's go win the property case first," he said. Courtroom 14 was presided over by the Honorable Sandra Okafor, a 58-year-old federal judge who had grown up in Nigeria, attended law school on a scholarship in London, and had zero patience for theatrics, delays, or what she privately called the performance of power by people who have mistaken a title for intelligence. She was also, as it happened, the kind of judge who noticed things. She noticed, for example, that when Marcus Cole and Diana Reyes entered Courtroom 14 at 9:03 a.m., Marcus had a look on his face that she recognized. Not anger, but the contained, deliberate calm of a man who has filed something away for later. She'd seen that look on veterans before. She respected it. She also noticed that the opposing counsel from Greystone Capital, a slick man named Philip Tanner who wore suits that cost more than most people's rent and had a habit of talking to judges like they should be grateful for the opportunity, had brought 2 associates and a paralegal, which was approximately 3 more people than a routine property dispute required. Greystone was planning to bury the other side in paper and procedure. Judge Okafor had seen that tactic before too. She was not impressed by it then. She was not impressed by it now. The case was, on its surface, straightforward. Marcus's mother, Eleanor Cole, had purchased the house at 412 Bramblewood Drive in 1981 for $47,000. She had paid it off completely by 2003. When she died in 2021, she left it to Marcus in a will that had been drafted, witnessed, and filed correctly with the county clerk's office. The deed had been transferred to Marcus's name in February of 2022. Greystone Capital claimed that the original 1981 deed contained a minor error in the legal property description, a discrepancy of 2 feet in the boundary line measurement, that technically invalidated the transfer chain and meant the property's title was clouded. They had filed a quiet title action, seeking to have the matter adjudicated, which in practical terms meant they were betting that they could confuse a judge long enough to get themselves inserted into the ownership chain of a house they had no legitimate claim to. It was the kind of legal maneuver that worked on people who couldn't afford good attorneys. It was the kind of thing that had stripped thousands of families, disproportionately black families, disproportionately families in neighborhoods that were now suddenly up and coming, of generational wealth that had taken lifetimes to build. Marcus had known what Greystone was the moment he'd looked them up. He'd done what any good SEAL does before an operation: research. He'd spent 3 weeks before the hearing compiling their history. 17 similar quiet title actions in Jefferson County in the past 4 years. 12 of them targeting properties owned by elderly black residents or their heirs. 9 of those had resulted in settlements where the family walked away with a fraction of the home's value or nothing at all because fighting cost more than settling. He had given everything he'd found to Diana Reyes, who had built it into a very specific legal strategy. They were not here just to win this case. They were here to make sure Greystone Capital never ran this play again. Philip Tanner opened for Greystone with the confidence of a man who expected to be applauded. He laid out the boundary discrepancy in elaborate detail, bringing in a property surveyor as an expert witness, submitting 47 pages of supporting documentation, and using the word clouded 11 times in 6 minutes, seemingly under the impression that repetition was persuasion. Judge Okafor listened with the expression of a woman who is calculating how much time is being wasted. Then Diana Reyes stood up. She was not a showy attorney. She didn't do dramatic pauses or rhetorical flourishes. What she did was be meticulously, devastatingly correct. She addressed the boundary discrepancy in approximately 4 minutes, introducing a corrective survey filed with the county in 1983, 2 years after the original deed, that had resolved the measurement issue and been properly recorded. The chain of title was not clouded. It had never been clouded. Greystone's own title search, she pointed out, should have found the 1983 survey. The fact that they were claiming otherwise suggested either profound incompetence or something considerably worse. Then she did something Philip Tanner had not expected. She introduced the pattern: 17 quiet title actions, 12 targeting properties in historically black neighborhoods, the settlement amounts, the demographics, the timeline, which conveniently tracked with Greystone's expansion into neighborhoods that a major development company had announced plans to revitalize. "Your Honor," Diana said, "what we have here is not a good faith property dispute. What we have is a predatory pattern of legal harassment designed to strip generational wealth from families who can least afford to fight back. The Cole property is not an isolated case. It is the latest in a deliberate campaign." Philip Tanner objected loudly. Judge Okafor sustained the objection on narrow grounds, but told Diana she could submit the pattern evidence as part of a broader filing, which was exactly what Diana had planned. The hearing lasted 2.5 hours. At the end of it, Judge Okafor did not make an immediate ruling. Property cases rarely resolved in a single hearing, but she made several comments from the bench that caused Philip Tanner's expression to go through 5 distinct stages of unhappy. She noted that the 1983 corrective survey appeared to render Greystone's core argument substantially undermined. She noted that the pattern evidence submitted by the defense was troubling and warranted review. And she noted, looking directly at Philip Tanner over her reading glasses, that the court did not appreciate having its time consumed by actions that appeared to have more to do with commercial opportunism than legitimate legal remedy. When Marcus and Diana walked out of Courtroom 14 at 11:38 a.m., Diana permitted herself a slightly wider smile than usual. "That went well," she said. "She's going to rule for us," Marcus said. "Almost certainly. Within 2 weeks, I'd guess." Diana tucked her legal pad under her arm. "But that's not actually the most important thing that happened today, is it?" Marcus looked down the hallway. Derek Hamlin's shift had apparently ended, because there was a different officer at the security checkpoint now. But Marcus had his recording. The young woman across the hall, who had introduced herself as Keisha Williams, a paralegal who had been waiting for a different case, had sent him the video before the hearing even started. He had 23 minutes of incident documentation, and he knew exactly what he was going to do with it. Marcus Cole didn't waste a single hour. By 2 p.m. that same day, still wearing the charcoal suit, he had filed a formal complaint with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. Precise, unemotional, documented, time, location, exact words, exact sequence of events. No embellishment. Just the record, clean and unassailable, with the audio attached. By 4 p.m., Diana Reyes was drafting a civil rights complaint. And at 4:17 p.m., Marcus posted a thread on X. Not a rant, not a call for outrage, just a calm, factual account of what happened in Hallway 2. His background, the incident, the complaints filed. He attached Keisha's video and closed with one line. I've handled harder situations than this. I'm not angry. I'm thorough. By midnight, it had been viewed 7 million times. CNN, the AP, and the Washington Post had all picked it up. Someone found his Navy Cross citation, the one describing how he'd run toward an active ambush in Afghanistan to pull out 2 wounded teammates, and the internet read it 9 million times in 48 hours. People began to understand what Derek Hamlin hadn't understood in that hallway. The man he'd decided to put in his place had already survived things that made a courthouse corridor look like a quiet afternoon. Derek's world collapsed fast. His personal number got posted online. 800 calls in 18 hours. His union rep Gary opened their first conversation with, Derek, in 22 years, this is the worst thing anyone has ever sent me. His supervisor, Lieutenant Carol Bright, called at 8 a.m., skipped the pleasantries, and placed him on immediate administrative leave. After she hung up, she looked at the 4 prior complaints in his file, the ones she'd managed instead of acted on, and finally called the county attorney's office. 3 years too late. But she made the call. The investigation lasted 11 days. 14 witnesses. 4 camera angles. A personnel file that told a story nobody had wanted to finish reading. The recommendation, termination. Sheriff Pemberton signed it on a Friday. Derek's union grievance failed 4 months later. The arbitrator's ruling was blunt, not an isolated lapse, but the culmination of a documented, inadequately addressed behavioral pattern. The badge. The pension. 19 years of identity. Gone. That same Friday, Judge Okafor ruled in Greystone Capital versus Cole. 14 pages. Crystal clear. For 12, Bramblewood Drive belonged to Marcus Cole. Diana called him with the news. He already knew. That evening, he drove to his mother's house and sat on the porch steps, the cracked one he'd been meaning to fix since 2018, and looked out at the street where he'd learned to ride a bike. He thought about the other families, the ones who'd settled, the ones who'd walked away from houses their parents had spent lifetimes building, because fighting had cost more than giving up. He wasn't done. He was nowhere close to done.